The Brothers Karamazov, Book 6, in Chapter 1. Again, now it seems like if you've been reading along that Zosima has been dying for years, but remember that this is only the second day that we've known these people, and so through hundreds of pages you're just getting deeper into the psychology, the history, the background of the characters. Not any time is really elapsing. And so again, it seems like the third time now that Alyosha has been back by Zosima's bedside, and Father Paisi, of course, has a Christian or a spiritual interpretation even of that event, which is, well, Zosima promised that he wouldn't die before he gave you Alyosha his last word, and so that's why he's alive, is because he made that promise, and so he was staying alive until you're here. So now Alyosha is here, and seeing his master Yoda about to pass on, Alyosha being a young, in touch with his feelings, emotional, loving 20-year-old young man, he begins to almost cry, and Zosima is almost, it seems, amused at Alyosha's emotional reaction, and says, I think jokingly, who knows, I might be alive for 20 more years, as the crazy lady said outside the other day. Now, I think this is really, maybe it's overstating to say the only point, but in my understanding, the only, I guess, really super important point of this chapter is, again, one of contrast. The serenity and the peace and the joy and the quietness of this scene contrasted with the end of Book 5 and really all of Book 5. If you were going to make this into a movie, Book 5 would be a Christopher Nolan movie. All the colors would be dark. All of the characters would have shadows in their faces as they were. Ivan would have the shadow in his face. He would be wearing an all-dark outfit, delivering his Grand Inquisitor speech. The music would be jarring. There would be uncomfortable images, and the camera would be moving around in uncomfortable ways, and everything to give this really jerky, uncomfortable, hard feeling. And then as the scene shifts to Zosima here in Book 6, everything, the language, the lighting, the background music, the dialogue, everything now is this soft, white glow of serenity, showing the contrast here. Fyodor is up, brooding around with absolute lust of the flesh. Ivan is up, full of tension and guilt and shame, all in his head, that my thoughts don't match up to the person that I should be. My moral person and my intellectual person are not on the same wavelength. And all of this anger and tension that you see in Fyodor and Ivan and Dmitri, these animals, these intellectuals, these rationalists are so like a foaming sea. And here we have the peaceful, serene, calm Zosima. And so what's the contrast? The contrast is that Ivan is a young man. Nothing overly dramatic has happened to him in his 20s. The things that trouble him are ideas, they are distant stories, they are philosophies, and yet Zosima is untroubled in the face of his own mortality, not in the face of the idea of his mortality, but he actually is going to die. And so there's the contrast between Zosima's serenity and Ivan's lack of serenity, along with Fyodor and Dmitri. Not only that, but the different situations. Dimitri's and Fyodor's are completely caused by their own lust, their own doing, their own character issues. They've brought all these issues on themselves. And I think what Dostoevsky is trying to do here is saying there's a little bit. This isn't as simple as, look at the cup is half full. I'm not saying that's what Dostoevsky is saying. But there is a teeny tiny bit of, well, which do you choose to focus on? Do you want to interpret life in the most negative way possible, as Ivan tends to do? Well, this is where it's going to end up. Sleepless nights and looking back on a previous day and saying, I am a scoundrel, as the last the last chapter concluded. Or do you want to face death with serenity and joy and peace, as Zosima does? And so the contrasts are not only how they're behaving, but what is driving their behavior, because the contrast is much more heightened when you not only contrast their behavior, but what has induced their behavior. Dmitri and Fyodor have brought it on themselves, and there's a sense in which even Ivan has brought a little bit of it on himself, because he chooses the darkness over the light. Now, the next two chapters will be full of sermons and advice from Zosima. But in this short chapter, he just said two more interesting things. The first thing he does is he quotes a Bible verse, which is not surprising or outstanding. And of all the critical treatments I've read and the couple college-level lectures I've seen online, no one has ever commented on this verse, so I don't want to make too big of a deal out of it. But I think it's a little bit significant, and I want to make a little bit of a big deal out of it, and that is that Zosima quotes to Alyosha John 12:24, where Jesus says to his disciples that unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, then it won't produce a fruitful harvest. And so it's pretty obvious in the original context that Jesus is referring to his crucifixion and basically telling his disciples that it's better if he is crucified, because if he's crucified, that his death will produce a harvest. So Jesus is saying, my body is like a seed that if it goes into the earth, much resurrection fruit will result after my death. And so Zosima is applying that passage, probably not in the same Christological way, but in an analogous, in a lesser way. He's saying, I have to die so that other people can take my place. So if you have a large religious figure, a respected or renowned or famous elder monk, well, maybe it's better when they die, because then that void it needs to be filled by people who can take that person's teaching or wisdom or program or whatever and take it out and take it further and expand it farther than they ever could. And I think what Zosima is getting at, because he says it explicitly yet again, I believe, I haven't kept an official, this is at least the third and possibly the fourth time he has told Alyosha that he needs to leave the monastery. And so I think what the seed dying to produce much fruit is, I think what Zosima is saying, you can be me, but you can be me in a way that actually affects people. I can be here in this monastery and people can come to me to hear my teaching or my counsel or my blessing. But if I die, then you can be me unleashed upon the world. In other words, Alyosha being my disciple, you're going to get a lot more fruit out of a saint out in the world than you are a saint almost in hiding. So that's kind of my interpretation there. The reason I bring it up as important, even though I've never seen anyone else attach any importance to that whatsoever, is I think I have 3 different editions of the book, and it's in all 3, so it's probably in every edition of the book. Before, you're either across from the table of contents or the author's introduction, or maybe in some editions Book 1, Chapter 1, that same verse is written under the author's dedication, dedicates this book to his wife, and underneath it says that. And I've always assumed that meant upon her death, but also referring to Zosima's death in this novel. So I'm speculating a little bit, but I would think that if a verse prefaces this entire gargantuan-sized novel, that it would be worthy of note once you're in the novel to see when Zosima quotes it, and that happens to be here. One final little note to make on this little chapter is Zosima's love for Alyosha, and he specifically says that you resemble in both appearance and character my brother, and we're going to hear much more about his brother in the very near future. But the reason I say that's significant is not only it previews the very next two chapters, but that, again, most, I don't want to say normal people, but most non-saintly monk people would just say, oh yeah, that guy looks like my brother, and then sort of move on with life and not sort of ascribe any hand of God or any sign of God into something like that. But Zosima does read a religious significance into a lot of things that the rest of us probably wouldn't. And so he sees Alyosha as this second chance, second encounter with his brother. And so I think it's a little interesting twist on Zosima's character, that he sees the hand of God, where some other people might just say, well, it's not a huge coincidence that a young man looks like a young man that you knew when he was young. And yet, for Zosima, it is significant. So we'll get way in depth with Zosima's scripture teaching, his sermons, and we'll see if Dostoevsky is able to pull off in Book 6 what he wrote to his original publisher, his original editor, as he published this periodically in a couple of magazines. Dostoevsky hoped that the entire novel would be an answer to Ivan's questions in Book 5. Many critics say that Dostoevsky doesn't pull that off, that Ivan's criticisms of the Christian faith in Book 5 they never even come close to being matched in Book 6. The contrast between Zosima and Ivan blows him out of the water. And that might be fair, and that might be true, and to be honest, I don't really care about who wins in the novel very much. But we need to remember that Dostoevsky told his editor that he intended the entire book to be an answer to Book 5, not just Book 6. And so, however, now going back, on the other hand, I do think that these next two chapters, Book 6, chapters 2 and 3, really are, in Dostoevsky's mind, the main counter to the Grand Inquisitor and the previous chapter having to do with the torture and abuse of innocent children. And so if you sort of put that much weight or that much expectation on chapters 2 and 3, I think most readers throughout the past century and a half have been not disappointed, but not thought that Dostoevsky was able to do that. But we'll leave that up to everyone's individual opinion. But just remember, the main point being, don't put all the weight of the rebuttal on these next two chapters, but do put some of the weight of the rebuttal on these next two chapters, and sort of weigh who you think makes a more convincing case: the argument, the words, the logic of Ivan, or the life of Zosima.